I'm excited though about this VR treadmill I'm gonna be building. Uh, I'm curious. Can you play Fortnite on a VR treadmill?
Sup, YouTube? We're gonna try something kind of special today. I am going to attempt to play Fortnite in virtual reality. Now, stop. Don't say anything yet. Obviously, Fortnite is not a VR game, but I think I have a way to still do it in VR while not being a VR title. So you guys should be able to see what I'm seeing. I can look down at my chair. This is where I'm sitting. Here's my keyboard, and then I have this nice space set up here. I'm actually in a cerebral theater in the back of my chair. I'll stand up here. Wow! There's a pathway. And yeah, if you guys wanted to join me, you can actually sit in these other chairs here. I think because I'm sitting up and standing up and moving around a lot, the audio might not be the best. But
He's sitting down for crying out loud. This is not VR exercise. What I would want would be something far more immersive where I am the character in the game in first person, and when I run, the character runs. Now, I imagine I could create something like that for like Counter Strike Go. Uh, well, I'd have to build my own client to make it truly all around me. But I mean, that would be stupid. I'm picturing like you could map running detection on your virtual treadmill as being the W key on your keyboard, and then when you run backwards, it's the S key. When you run left, it's the A key. When you run right, it's the D key. And so you can just map that to your keyboard, and so you have to actually run to move your character. But I would also kind of want the faster I run for my character to run faster too. I mean, I'm gonna build my own VR treadmill, but I would want a commercially successful, really fun game to play. Oh, this is stupid. Oh, this is stupid, okay? Why the hell would I want to run on a virtual road when I can run in a war and be playing an FPS game? That's boring as hell. I can run on a virtual road in real life and it'd be a real road, and that's boring too. The whole point of this is to make running way, way funner to the point where you don't even realize you're running because you're fighting in a game, you're killing people. That's fun. I just want to kill people, okay? In video games. Well, it'd be very easy to make my own game, FPS, that's made for VR treadmill. So I'm sure other companies would do it, but just not enough people have a VR treadmill to make it worthwhile to make a AAA game for a VR treadmill. But um, by the time I built my AAA game for VR treadmill, there'd already be a bunch out. So I'm just gonna wait for that. But in the meantime, I can build a treadmill, maybe build some kind of simple game for myself. I don't know, maybe a single player, something basic. Although I could probably create a game engine with a game environment copying a Counter Strike Go map, and then have it hack into the real Counter Strike Go client, detecting all the player locations just like an aimbot can do of all the enemy and teammates, and then map those into my VR treadmill game and my VR treadmill map so that it will still register where I fire in my game and then transmit what I did to the actual game client playing Counter Strike Go. So, like, let's say in my game, my engine picks up, I turned here and I aimed here and I pulled the trigger. And it can actually get my rotational angle in vertical and in pitch and yaw or whatever, and it can map out my movement and my location on the map in X, Y, and Z. And then when I run forward in my game, it presses W on Counter-Strike Go, which I don't see. I have a copy of Counter-Strike Go's map, and it's okay. So what I'm saying is, my VR treadmill, every time I run forward, I move forward in my copy of Counter-Strike Go, my virtual map, in my own game engine. Let's say I move forward 10 feet. In my engine, it shows that in my virtual world, my copy of the game, it shows me moving forward 10 feet. Now, I have that program press W on my keyboard to move forward 10 feet in the actual game in real time. And so in the game, my character moves 10 feet just as I, as my character in my copy of the game client, move forward 10 feet. And then when I turn left in my game, my game engine sees I turn left, and it moves the mouse left. So my game engine becomes an intermediary between me and the Counter-Strike Go client, and by just creating identical maps and character models and textures and everything else, I can actually be in a full simulated Counter-Strike Go map world with me actually in it and able to look around myself and see the entire map up, down, left, and right. Not just a screen on VR, but around me. I'm in the world because I've rebuilt the map world and I put myself in it using my own game engine. And my game engine serves as an intermediary between me and the actual Counter-Strike Go client. So the Counter-Strike Go client still receives the inputs that I, in my VR treadmill, put in, and it transfers those onto the client. So the client does not need to be VR at all. I created a VR client built on top of the client distributed by the game company that built the game. So I have to create a copy of the game in my own virtual world and then have my game engine communicate with the game client through mouse and keyboard, translating everything I do in my virtual world to the game client in the actual Counter-Strike Go servers receive all of my inputs, which in this case would be me running around and me firing in my VR world on my VR treadmill. So in that way I can integrate a VR treadmill experience into an existing AAA game, and it would not have to be a VR capable AAA game. To do turning on a treadmill, it's a VR treadmill. It's like a bowl and you wear slippery shoes. You just turn your body, and sensors in your VR treadmill keep track of the orientation of your gun and of the orientation of your head. When you turn your head and you turn your gun, all that's synced up and interpreted by the VR treadmill to determine where on the screen you'd be pointing on the game client, and then it will move your cursor to point in that direction. When you fire by pulling your actual trigger, it will do that, pressing the left mouse button, sending that command to Windows, which is mouse click or left mouse click. It's a command you give to Windows through C++ in your program. So this is going to go down, guys. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to add this to my to-do list. Um, Create virtual world copy of popular CSGO maps or Fortnite maps. Can use data mining for exact replication of the maps into my own client. Same as people create private servers with client clones for MMO games. Then I build my VR headset with my client clone and have the VR treadmill interpret my movements, gun aim, running, etc. into precise mouse and keyboard real-time movements so that everything I do in my VR game client clone is transferred into the real game client. In this way, I can still compete against other real players in FPS games and MMO games. But I become a first-person participant in these games and am physically inserted into the game world bodily so that it feels like I'm actually inside the game, and this despite the game not being designed to do VR. So it is a VR adaptation of the game, piggybacking onto the game client. Note that sensors will detect my head movements and gun aim and running movements and translate that immediately into the FPS game. Note that when running, I may not run that fast, and VR World can punish me by shift running or whatever, so the game character walks. So I have to really run to make the game character run full speed. And when I really run, it will feel like I'm running fast as heck. Since in games characters run very fast, I will feel like some kind of superhero due to my perceived running speed in the VR game. I don't know if you would, as a viewer on Twitch, see him running around the CSGO map. You would see two things. You would see his first person view, everything he sees mapped out onto OBS in a flat circumstance, so you'd see a FPS game basically. You wouldn't see his fat body at all. And then in the corner, you could see, the cam view where it just shows him with a green screen behind him or not. It just shows him running around with his goggles on and like shooting stuff. So you'd see that like in the bottom corner. and that's how that would look. It's not like you'd see his fat body actually superimposed into the game. Um, I mean, you'd have to build a separate client as a viewer mode client that could actually put with a green screen his body physically into the game and then run a third person cam off of that client. That'd be a third client now. So the first client would be him in his first person point of view being in the game. You guys wouldn't see that. And then there'd be the client actually playing the game, interpreting his VR treadmill and converting that into mouse and keyboard movements to send to the game server, and then that's his interaction with the actual game. And then the third client would be a viewer mode only client, which would be what is broadcast to OBS and to ultimately Twitch and YouTube. And that would be seeing a third person point of view of him in the game running around and shooting and stuff. And that'd be like how Fortnite has a third person follow cam behind the player that you're playing. And so you'd actually be able to see his body superimposed into the game if he had a green screen. So that would be a possibility. You could put a green screen in front of you as the player and a camera behind you, and then just sync up the camera following you in real life to the camera in the game in the third virtual game world client, and then have that on OBS. So you would actually it'd look like that person was physically playing the game in the game as the character model that's playing the game. It could actually look like that for you as the Twitch viewer, and that might be very cool for people. That's a very interesting idea. I like that. So your misinterpretation of how this is all going to work from a viewer point of view actually gave me that idea, so I appreciate that. Consider creating a third client that has a follow cam POV on your FPS character and a green screen on you playing the VR game and a RL webcam following you IRL, and with the help of the green screen, it can then put you into the game world, and that is what the OBS will capture, so that to viewers it looks like you are actually inside the game while they are watching. That's very clever, console. I really love that with this idea, you don't have to actually make a VR game or convince big studios to make a VR game. People who own VR treadmills are stuck using VR specific games that suck. They're made by indie companies with very low budgets, and they're not creative or anything. But to be able to take an existing very popular, very fun, explosively successful game and just port it to a VR treadmill using some client cloning and a bunch of tomfoolery to integrate in existing games that you can actually compete with other players, but you're in a VR treadmill setup, whereas they're playing on mouse and keyboard on their monitor. That's bringing one platform, PC gaming, to another platform, VR gaming. Not only VR gaming, but alternate reality gaming. Uh, and then you're actually competing against real people or with real people that way. It's brilliant. And it opens up the amount of titles you can take part in. So you're not limited to the very small selection of VR treadmill capable games anymore. You can actually play Fortnite, CS:GO, PUBG, whatever you want. It just requires the ability to clone the client in order to create a virtual world VR capable version of the client just for your own viewing experience. And then that client's only job is to display that world to you in your VR game experience on your treadmill. And then it captures your input, which is you moving around, running, and firing, and it translates that to mouse and keyboard commands, which then interface with the normal game client. That's the only job here. And I don't even think that breaks the rules of any games. You can't bot games and you can't create private servers for games, but I don't see why they'd have a problem of you porting their game to make it more accessible to another platform. And yet they're still using the original game client. They're not cheating, they're not hacking or anything. It's almost like I have played in the past games on a console controller that had a program called Total Game Control, I believe, that would interpret my joystick movements and then send those as mouse and keyboard commands. The buttons I press and the joystick movements, it would map that onto mouse and keyboard, and then it would send that to Windows, which would then send those commands to the game client, and then the game client would jump or move forward or whatever based on what I did on my video game controller. And so I had an interpreter, Total Game Control, that served as a middleman, mapping out what I did on my video game controller into the game, so I could actually play the game on a controller. And this is the same premise as that your VR treadmill setup would have an interpreter that would interface with the game, so you're playing the same game as people on mouse and keyboard, except using a VR setup. And the only difference here is your interpreter also interprets the entire game client into a clone just for the purpose of giving you the audio visual experience of being in the game world in virtual reality. So that port is the one addition to the same concept. And game makers have never had a problem with people using an interpreter software to interpret their mouse and keyboard commands from a video game controller. It wasn't considered to be scripted or botting or anything like that because the person still has to actually physically input commands using their own hands and body, and those get put into the game, so it's not an automation. They just don't want automation on games. So this would be perfectly within the rules of all the games, except for it's kind of a little bit of a gray area in that you're creating a clone of the client. But I mean, I don't think any game makers would mind because you're still using their client, you're still paying for their game, and you're still playing their game, and you're not automating anything. And yeah, you're opening up their game to more potential users if you were to sell this. So you'd probably have to get permission, but I don't see any problem. And for sure for personal use, I mean, it'd be fine. But if I were to try to um, sell this technology, which I very well could, then that could be a big moneymaker for people that want to play fun FPS games like Team Fortress and PUBG and CS:GO and Fortnite and whatever. If they want to play that while getting exercise, they can do that. I think that could be incredibly popular and might even cause a huge decline in gym memberships for a certain age group that would rather play fun, popular games like FPS games online than actually go to a gym and just sit on a treadmill watching TV. It's boring as heck. You need a separate client console. You would map the input to the game itself, but what you're not seeing is this. If I just take the game and port it to VR, all it's going to be is just a big game screen that I see with my VR goggles. It's still a flat screen. I'm not physically inside the game. So when I run and turn and stuff, it's got to maybe move that screen to where I turn, But then it's not going to be the same as being when I turn to look left, I'm looking at the left wall. When I turn to right, I'm looking at the right wall. And that illusion of being physically inside the game wouldn't work on a flat game. You have to be able to create a copy of that game world in a VR headset. That's the separate client. It's just a copy of the world so that it works more immersive than just like a screen that you're looking at, just a big screen like you're playing on a big screen. That's not immersive at all. You can tell it's flat. Yeah, I mean what you're suggesting console is just playing the game on a big screen and instead of using a mouse and keyboard, you're using a gun and instead of the W key, you're just running. But that's not VR. That's not actual VR. That's just basically running and a gun being an extension of the mouse and keyboard, but you lose the immersiveness of being in a virtual reality where you see it as if you're in that world. So that's the only reason why you have to copy the world is so that you can have that full immersion experience like you're inside. I mean, maybe you don't need that. I mean, in a 3D game, I look at my monitor, but it's not completely immersive. But if you take your monitor and you put it up to your eyes like this, no, I don't think it'd work because you would just see pixels and stuff. And you want it to wrap around so that even your peripheral vision, you see sidewalls. And you can't do that with the normal game client, I don't think. You'd have to wrap it, and the game client would have to somehow be like fisheye lens, and you'd have to like map it to a fisheye VR so that like when you're looking forward, you can actually see like enemy players with your peripheral vision, like over here. Whereas you can't do that in a normal game. It will just have a. It's called a FOV, I believe, frame of view, where it will actually take a snapshot of the 3D world that you're in, and that's what you see on your monitor. It doesn't open up the frame of view so that you can see it with peripheral vision and stuff like fisheye lens. But you can do that in VR. Where that'd be a slight advantage for VR in an FPS game that you can actually, if you have good peripheral vision in real life, you can actually see movement and you can quickly go like that and shoot. Whereas like somebody on a monitor wouldn't have seen somebody to their right at all because they can only see what's in front of them. So you would have a slight advantage in that you'd have a huge field of view, and you can see people like way out here moving a little bit and be alerted. So it'd be harder to sneak up on somebody with a VR headset in an FPS game. You can't mod the standard client. That's the whole point. The standard client has a preset field of view, and it will always have that. You can't expand the field of view and convert it to a fisheye, stretching it and warping it and making it all work with the way the VR goggles are set up. You can't just do that. There's a lot of technology involved in that. That's how you make a virtual reality game or environment. I don't believe it'd be bannable because number one, they wouldn't know. It'd be undetectable. But number two, you could just ask permission. Um, you just say, "Hey, can I make a port for your game for VR treadmills so people can play it on VR?" And then you can show them a demo, and then they'll be like, "Sure," but they'll be like, "No, I mean, you're not going to sell a copy of our game and monetize our game, are you?" No, I'm not. They have to buy your game to play your game. It's not like a private server. This is just a port of the game that just converts your game to virtual reality, and they're still playing with your client. And if you explain it to the game developer that it's interpreting everything from the VR treadmill and converting that to mouse and keyboard commands, no different than a gamepad has a software program that converts what you do with your gamepad into the game, which game makers have already agreed to and had no problems with. I think whatever advantage you might have with being able to see better vision because of VR would be immediately taken away by the fact that you've got to literally be running around rather than pressing W. So that's going to make your aim off and you got to like stop to fire, whereas in a game you can just press W, jump, and fire very accurately. I mean, you're going to have tons of disadvantages. So whatever advantage just from peripheral vision that would give you an FPS game, that would be taken away by all the disadvantage of being physically having to move a gun and stuff rather than just whip your mouse around. It'd be a lot slower. Well, I'd have to ask permission if I'm going to start selling it. Although I could just sell it black market style. There's no way they'd sue me. If they really understood the technology, there's no way they'd actually sue me, I don't think. But if I sold 1 million copies and I made a multi-million dollar company, sure, one of these game companies would probably sue me just because they're not suing me because it's hurting their game. They're suing me because they see money on the table and they want a piece. And you can try to settle outside of court with them. I don't think they'd want to completely stop you. I mean, you're just trying to get their game more players. Unlike being a video game botting company where you're actually taking revenue from them, I can make the argument that I'm actually just expanding their game into new markets and actually driving more player base to them while not grieving anybody. It's actually just growing their player base. It's actually benefiting them financially. So, if anything, the game company would say, I just want a cut of the money you're making selling the port to my game because you're kind of making money with people playing my game. Even though it's just piggybacking onto their game, their game still is helping generate sales for me. But then, I don't know. I mean, I could see them wanting a cut, basically. Well, being interested in VR, Steam's solution just to stick VR as a big screen on your goggles, that's just a bigger monitor. I can go buy a bigger monitor. That doesn't put me as a player into a virtual world. They're lacking that stuff. And I've solved technologically how you do that on existing games. So that would be how I'd do it. And I'm going to do unless if it's out by the time I get around to this. It's on my to-do list now. In fact, I'll add it to my Twitch to-do list as well. Gosh, I'm excited, guys! You realize that what I'm proposing is going to enable me to do gaming streaming for you guys on a near daily basis for an hour or two with tremendous cardiovascular workouts that I get to enjoy and possibly make a fortune. Okay, console, but for them to make a virtual reality game is retarded when they could just port existing successful titles to virtual reality, which is what I'm proposing. You don't have to make a whole game just for VR and then sell it as a VR game. You make games that have a VR setting. So you still make it for everybody, mainstream. Everyone that owns a computer can play, and everyone that owns a console can play. But the same exact game can just be ported to VR mode. And so you're not stuck trying to make specific games only for people that have VR. Because that's not very profitable. That's why they haven't done it much. Because not a lot of people can afford VR, not a lot of people have it. Especially VR treadmill. I'm very excited about this. Thank you guys for helping me come on to this idea. This is absolutely fantastic. And I don't give a crap if VR is dead because it's not economically practical to develop games for VR. the solution is to port existing games into VR, and there needs to be a company that does the porting. And that's what I would be proposing doing myself, just for some of my favorite games, my favorite maps of my favorite games. I would port it and sell that porting, and that'd be really fun for people that have VR to play. And then if I wanted to, I could build a whole company around just porting all the top titles and all the latest games to VR treadmill setups so people can actually do cardiovascular exercise and be fully immersed in their favorite games. And we're talking even old school famous games and old school MMOs. You can actually be inside the game looking at the big dragons in your MMOs, like casting the spells physically. Maybe there could even be animations when you do this. You know, you're doing a frostbolt or a fireball, and you have to actually move your hands according to the spell you're casting. And because when you play a MMO, you learn like this is a certain healing move, and or like this is a heal, and so you would do that to cast certain spells. You'd memorize all the choreography to do what the character does in the game to cast a spell. That would be hilarious. So that you can be the wizard in real life in your VR treadmill game. And then FPS games, obviously, it's like this. But it'd be kind of fun for an FPS game. You do this, and you throw a grenade, and that actually presses the grenade throw button on your keyboard when it's interpreted and transferred to the game client. So you'd have all these different things you do with your hands, and the sensors in your FPS VR treadmill setup would interpret those things and do different functions that you normally would press a keyboard key for. So jumping, you would jump on your treadmill. Running and running backwards, side shuffling, it translate that to ASDW, whatever, on the keyboard. Um, and then throwing grenades and stuff. Yeah, that's another thing. If you're a FPS gamer just getting into VR FPS, I mean, first of all, you could create your own private, not private servers. Like on Counter Strike, you used to be able to create your own server on the game. It's not a private server like in an MMO. That's against the rules of MMOs. I'm talking about private servers on FPS games. Those are totally condoned by Valve. So let's say you had a Counter Strike private server that's for VR treadmill users only, because everybody's going to be running around the map halfway through the round. They're going to be bent over trying to catch their breath. It'll be hilarious because they're going to be tired. So long matches, actually, the team that wins will be the team in the best shape because they can sit there and keep running, like, and kill people longer when the fatty's out of breath. It'll be hilarious. But with time, as you continue to play these games, you'll get in better shape and start winning games because you can actually last the whole 10-minute match. But it'd be crazy. Like, how many matches can you do before you're just done for the day? It'd be hilarious. Like, you'll play VR games as long as you can. Maybe you'll get in super good shape if you're addicted to games to where you're playing VR FPS games for like 4 hours a day. You'll be like ripped, like shredded. Can you imagine that? Especially if you started wearing like weights and stuff and carrying a heavy gun. You would be like in the best shape of your life if you get addicted to it. And you can get addicted to games and it'd be a healthy addiction, super healthy. Yeah. No, what do you mean without omnidirectional treadmill? No, I think no, I would have to sell an omnidirectional treadmill to do what I'm doing. I mean, or just no, what I could do is have you able to buy it from one of these companies that is already producing omnidirectional treadmills, and you'd buy my software program that integrates into their treadmill system and integrates into the game. So I would just create a port that clones game clients, integrates with the treadmill systems you can buy commercially already, and it integrates into the games, which you also have to buy commercially already. You'd buy my software, which ports everything. It couples it all together seamlessly to make an omnidirectional treadmill set, which you can buy, match with Team Fortress or whatever, and you can actually play the game using my software solution that glues it all together. That way I don't have to get into the hardware development business of mass manufacturing omnidirectional VR treadmills. But I could get into that business as well. I'd be in a uniquely ideal situation to bundle them, or become a distributor of omnidirectional treadmills through an agreement with the company that already manufactures them. I could just do a licensing deal or just be one of their distributors. I mean, I own a small business and I sell products and I sell them sometimes to stores who sell them to their retail customers. I'd just be another retail outlet for them to sell their treadmills. They're probably having a hard enough time selling their treadmills because there's only 5 games to play on it and they're all boring jogging games with a simulated street and you're just running through a street. Big freaking deal. Imagine if I'm able to bring to the table now they can play CS:GO and Fortnite instead of stupid running on a fake street, looking at other runners past them. Like, how is that fun? But yeah, I would shoot if that could even go into pro gaming. Like, there could be VR treadmill. It might be funner for the audience to see gamers who are like super shredded playing each other on VR treadmills. There'd be a whole different skill set. It'd be a whole different gaming community that would develop around this of people that are hardcore FPS or MMO gamers who are masters at VR treadmill, and it'd just be totally different than watching normal gamers just sitting quietly, pale, and very skinny and malnutrition, pressing on keyboard and mouse in a chair. There'd be a kind of cool element of seeing them like actually sweating and kicking and like running and jumping and throwing grenades. Like, that'd be pretty exciting from a viewer's point of view. It'd be a whole new level of immersion for both the gamer and the viewer. So that's a great implementation from a esports point of view of having a follow cam and a green screen around the player so that you can impose the player into the virtual game environment so that it looks like to the audience that watching on a big screen that that player is actually in the game physically, and he could even dress like a counter terrorist or a terrorist so that he fits into the game and you're looking at him, some fat guy or some shredded guy, whatever he is, you're looking at him actually in the game. And talk about great animations and graphics because he's like running in real life. It's gonna be like super high definition, so he'll look great in the game. But I can definitely see people creating their own like private servers on FPS games that are VR treadmill only. So yeah, this has a lot of exciting implications and possibilities, and I think it would be very excellent business model. And I'm gonna do it, man. I'll just start out with one map, like just a CS:GO map, maybe CS Office or whatever. I'll make the map and I'll port it. It'll all be integrated into the game, and I'll make my own omnidirectional VR set with all the sensors and stuff. Or I'll buy one, but I think I'll probably prefer to make one if it's not too hard. And then we'll be good. I can bring it to market. Just the one map I could start selling to people who already own VR treadmill setups. I just have to make sure it works on different commercially available VR treadmills, and then ultimately maybe someday down the road build my own VR treadmills and sell them. But I'm sure a lot of companies would come up to compete with that and compete with all this. I mean, it's an open market, but the fact that I can be the first to market, maybe. I mean, this is something I want, and that's what you always want to do as an entrepreneur building a business. Create it for yourself, something you want, and somebody else out there is going to want it. All it would take is somebody in their 30s who used to be an FPS gamer who doesn't have time for that. They have an office, they have a job, they don't have time for gaming, and they're bored to death of sitting in a gym on a freaking bicycle or treadmill. And it's not ever nice enough outside to go jogging except 1 month out of the year. And so they're stuck doing this boring indoor workouts, and they could actually be playing an FPS game while they work out, and they wouldn't even realize they're working out. It's a genius idea. People laugh about it. Nobody wants to buy VR stuff, but I think that's a big oversight. And I also think it's based on the quality of the games. Whenever you see people playing these games, they're these low graphics, shitty games that people made because I mean, big game companies aren't going to spend millions and millions of dollars making a VR game. And it's amazing that they haven't thought of this before. I'm the first to think of this, I guess, that you can actually port existing games and have you play popular games using this. It's way better. So you can actually play good stuff that's fun and has a big player base and there's a lot of hype around it. You can actually do that in a VR treadmill. You don't have to feel like you're missing out playing some crappy first person solo game in single player mode that's like got 1995 graphics. I'm super excited about this. And I was already building a video game engine. I have all the expertise here. I was already going to build my own AAA games, and I still am. But this is just another integration of my AAA games into now another platform and a new way to sell, and now integrating it into existing successful games as well. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, I think I probably would ask permission though from game companies just to play it safe because they're going to want eventually. I mean, we don't know how good it works with the VR though. That we still don't know. Just by like stretching everything into fisheye and then mapping it to the sides so it looks like it's all around you, it might work, but you might not have as good as if you created your own client and cloned the map. But that's way more work, obviously. This is better than that if it's doable. I mean, better in that it's easier. People are saying it's fake. Aha! That's it, console. That's why you can't make VR. It's just a fisheye version of an existing game because of stereoscopic vision, which is how our eyes work. You need to create two copies of the game client, one with you looking at it from a little to the left and one with you looking at it a little to the right, because our eyes converge on things which make the 3D effect. So if you take this bottle, my right eye sees the right half of it more and my left eye sees the left half of it more, and that gives me depth perspective. If I close one eye, I can't see as much of the left half as I can if I open my right eye. You can see more of the right half with my right eye open. And so because of the separation of our eyes, you have to render two 3D scenes, one shifted over a little bit, and that gives depth perspective. Depth perspective. And that's the major difference. So you would need to clone the game client and create the two in order for everything to look three-dimensional in the VR world. So there we go. These people just taking existing games and fisheye lensing it and then mapping that onto the VR set, it's all going to look flat. It won't give you depth perception. It will look flat. So, I mean, it wouldn't be as good then, but it would still be pretty good. The replies of random people are more powerful than a random person just writing an article. You get to see what the public point of view is. You read a lot of different replies. I love that. But anyways, yeah. So I guess that's that's the definition. You have to render two scenes, one for each eye, and you're not going to be able to do that unless if you make your own separate game client. Um, but you could create a really flat, crappy looking VR, I guess, just using a fisheye algorithm. VR that uses treadmills is not a long way off. We just watched videos of that. What are you talking about?